Good morning. Welcome to Convince Me, presented by Bet365. We are starting off the Action Network Power Hour. Don't forget, bottom half of the hour, stick around for the touchdown show with Nick, Giffen, and Gilles Gallant. Everything you need to get caught up on the anytime touchdown market. But first, I got the best panelists in the world for all the stuff, none of the fluff of the other pregame shows. I got Sean Koerner, I got Simon Hunter, I got Chris Raybon. They're going to try to convince me how I should spend my money today in the betting markets. We got Darren Rovell on the Action Network news desk. We got Samantha Previte giving us some start, sit, drop, genius analysis. But first, reminder, we are presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in New Jersey and Colorado. Bet $1 on any game, get $200 free. Folks, reminder, everything we're talking about, all the spreads, all the totals, all the analysis, all the picks, all the data, available for free in the award-winning Action Network app. Sean Koerner, start us off with some player props.
So I'm going with the grossest prop on my card today, and that's Kendall Hinton to go under 38.5 receiving yards against the Chiefs today. And I think this is just a bit inflated because Courtland Sutton is out today, but I don't expect Hinton to get too much of a boost from this because his playing time is already maxed out. He already runs a route on around 90% of Russell Wilson's dropbacks, and he's unlikely to see much of an increase in terms of target share because Jerry Jeudy should be able to return to his full-time role this week. He was actually removed from the injury report from his ankle injury that's been bugging him in the past few weeks. So Jeudy will be Wilson's number 1 target. Greg Dulcich will be his number 2 target. Hinton might be his 3rd. And there's another reason why I like that. Kendall Hinton, he's caught 83% of his targets this season, which is unsustainable. Based on his ADOT of around 10.5 yards, you would expect him to catch closer to 67% of his target. So I think he is due for some regression there. And I'm projecting this closer to 31.5. So I have about 7 yards of value on this. Plus, this correlates nicely with your Denver bet today. So even more reason to take this prop. Yes,
we were talking before the show that I have dedicated my life to betting on the Denver Broncos at plus 9.5. And look, if you break it down, Kendall Hinton, 3rd option in an offense that can't score more than 15 points a game. You kind of making the case without having to say anything else. Simon Hunter, last week you came on this show. You said AJ Brown plus 125 anytime touchdown in a revenge spot against the Tennessee Titans. He went out and he did it twice. What gifts can you bring forth today?
Yeah, another great spot with another good receiver. Give me St. Brown, the Lions' number 1 receiver, to catch a touchdown today. You can get it from plus 120 to plus 100. Shop around, look for it. Just a good number anywhere you can get it. It's a matchup we expect a lot of points to have, and a matchup between the defenses that are just bad. We've seen this Viking secondary struggle against top receivers, and especially St. Brown, who in their first matchup, he had 9 catches. He didn't get a touchdown. We've seen as the season's gone along here, the chemistry of him and Goff has really started to build. So the last 2 weeks, he's had 3 touchdowns. That's no fluke. Like, he's looking for him in the red zone. He's looking for him on deep shots. And St. Brown makes his own plays. He's the kind of guy that's like what Odell from back in the day. Take a slant route and just take it all the way. That's kind of special talent you hear him, St. Brown, against a bad Viking secondary. A secondary that can give up yards this season. They're in the bottom 5 in yards allowed this season to wide receivers. So just a defense we've seen struggle. Indoor matchup. Everything seems like it's clicking right now for Detroit. So I'm going to take that plus number here with St. Brown.
All right. A little more foreshadowing. We're going to get deeper into the Vikings and the Lions later in the show. Chris Raybon, like, Koerner's kind of stealing your gross, disgusting 3rd string under corner of the world. So what are you going to do?
I'm going with Austin Hooper over 20.5 receiving yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think this is way too low because of how he started the season. His first 5 games, just 11 yards on average receiving. But since the bye, in his last 7 games, he's averaging 3 catches for 32 yards per game. And over his last 2 games, he's averaging 24 routes per game, 66% route participation, which is up from 16.3 routes and 57% in his first 10. So he's trending up, and that's going to have to continue because no Treylon Burks for Tennessee and no Cody Hollister. So they're missing their top 3 receiver and their 4th receiver as well. So you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. And then the matchup is great. Jacksonville is 31st in DVOA against tight ends. 3 of the last 4 tight ends went over their receiving yardage prop against Jacksonville. And Hooper has cleared this number in each of the last 5 games, 6 of the last 7. And he's had 30 plus yards in 4 of the last 5 and 5 of the last 7. I think this number should actually be around 30. So I love this over 20.5 all day for Austin Hooper.
Oh my goodness. This is scary because A, you're choosing an over. B, I feel like player props are the one area where coming into the show on Sunday, I have the least opinion. So when I'm hearing all this stuff, I'm hearing it mostly for the first time, trying to make my decision. I feel like oftentimes I suffer from recency bias. I hear what Raybon has to say. He's so convincing because he's so dedicated to it.
It's the name of the show, Chad.
I know. I feel like you get a little bit of an advantage by going 3rd in the player prop market. I'm going with Kendall Hinton. The thing that got me, and I said it, when you break it down, Kendall Hinton being the 3rd option for Russ in an offense that cannot score, it's hard not to want to take that one. So I'm going Kendall Hinton under his receiving total, in his receiving yardage total. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown anytime touchdown. I love Raybon, what you're saying. I'll probably end up betting all 3 of them. You can track it in the Action Network app. But for the purpose of this segment, Kendall Hinton, congratulations. We're betting on your under. All right, let's go to start, sit, drop. We're talking about Jared Goff, Deshaun Watson, and Trevor Lawrence, Samantha Previte, Sean Koerner, Chris Raybon. Previte, you're up first.
Sure. So I am starting Goff, sitting Watson, and dropping Lawrence, and here is why. Watson definitely looked rusty in his debut for the Browns last week as their defense actually carried them to a win. He was the QB 30 with 2 teams on bye and did not throw a touchdown in the game. I am not writing him off for dead completely, but he does get a much tougher matchup this week against the Bengals, whose defense ranks bottom 6 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, since he ranks top 9 in pass DVOA and has only allowed multiple passing touchdowns in 1 game all season. So I just see no reason to trust him this week. Though after this, the schedule does soften with the Ravens, Saints, Commanders, and Steelers to finish out the year. Goff and Lawrence both have decent matchups this week against defenses that are below average against the pass. Goff gets the slight edge for me, though, because he finished as the QB4 last week, piling on 40 points against the Jags. This should be another high-scoring affair with the 2nd highest point total of the week against the Vikings. And I am optimistic about this offense, which has started to look a lot healthier with Swift looking good, Chark back, and Williams on the field. Lawrence has been hot of late, but did struggle against the Lions last week, finishing as the QB16. He's dealing with a toe injury and has a pretty tough schedule after this week with the Cowboys and Jets on deck in weeks 15 and 16. And even in this easier matchup for week 14, this game has the 3rd lowest point total of the slate. And unlike the Lions, they are field goal underdogs. So Lawrence would be my top drop candidate.
All right, Koerner, Samantha's going with Goff, Watson, Lawrence for start, sit, drop. Last week, you guys were split. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm in line with her. I have Jared Goff as my start. He's just on fire right now, coming off a 340-yard 2-touchdown game against the Jaguars. And if, Jamison Williams is able to play more this week, this is going to be the first time Goff has had all 4 of his wide receivers at his disposal this year. And this game has the 2nd highest total. So he's clearly my start here. He's my QB 11 this week. And Deshaun Watson's a sit. I thought he would be rusty last week, but he looked even worse than I imagine against the Texans of all teams. So he could actually take a couple more games before we can even trust him as a potential top 10 option. So he's my QB 12. And then dropping Trevor Lawrence out of these 3. Great matchup today against the Titans, but hard to trust him with this toe injury. Not only could it impact his rushing ability, but it could impact him as a passer. He won't be able to move around the pocket as easily. So I'm dropping him out of these 3. And like Samantha mentioned, he has a tough 2-game stretch after this against the Cowboys and Jets. So he's my QB 14 this week, but he'll probably be even lower the next 2 weeks.
Raybon, you like to play spoiler in this segment. Will you do it again this week?
Nope, I'm starting Goff. Lions averaging over 30 a game at home. Watson, I think, will be fine this week. He's going to run more. And Lawrence, I think Tennessee is actually a very tough matchup. I don't ever want my quarterback facing the Titans unless it's Jalen Hurts or somebody like that. So sitting Lawrence. I mean, dropping.
Right, so we have consensus, which means by all means, Jared Goff is about to have the worst game of his entire career.
Yep.
Darren, at least we're all in
No, he's just going to hand it off to Jamal Williams for 4 touchdowns. That's what's going to happen.
Know what we're getting into. Oh my God, this is all disgusting. Darren, what's happening on the news desk?
All right, let's do player props first. DeAndre Swift over 24.5 receiving yards. He's coming off 49 receiving yards in his last game. He's done that, the over on that 5 times this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown over 84.5 receiving yards. Maybe it's recency bias, maybe just Lions home, over 103 of the last 4 games. Mark Andrews under 60.5 receiving yards. He's gone 50-50 for the season on that. We need to talk about a couple things. First, Saquon Barkley is active. Second, this Bengals-Browns movement is weird, but we do understand the word is that there's a syndicate steaming it all the way down to -4. It was at -6 earlier in the week. The Bengals are, and the sports books we talked to, by the way, it seems like the move's at MGM, but the other books still have 65-75% of the money in bets on the Bengals. So, when you see these things, obviously it's not everywhere. Most bet games, Vikings, Lions. The public loves the Lions, which is a little bit scary, of course. Chiefs, Broncos, and Bengals, Browns. Browns are at 11-1 to win the Super Bowl, which is the shortest they've been this season. Most bet teams by money, Broncos plus 9.5. This is Russell Wilson's, the largest home dog he has ever been in his career. Lions -1.5, and Bengals, as we said, was at 5.5, now down to 4. Burrow is 10-1 when it is 50 degrees or less. So for all you guys doing all the Browns, they can't beat the Browns, whatever. And the Bengals have covered 4 straight for the first time in 5 years.
All right. So just for people who are, if you are new to the show, if you don't understand the terminology, when there's money coming in on a team, it's usually an indication that is professional bettors who like a side. So when Darren says money is coming in on the Broncos, that could be a sign that the professional bettors have liked the Broncos. Speaking of sides, I promised we were going to talk about the Vikings and the Lions. Koerner, you're wearing a Lions hat. It's hard to tell what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I'm going with the Lions -2 today. This is essentially the luck rankings bowl. The Vikings top our luck rankings as always, which seems to be the case, and the Lions ranked 25th. And I'm sure to a novice bettor, seeing the 10-2 Vikings as a 2-point underdog against the 5-7 Lions has to be a bit baffling. Unfortunately, I think the public is a lot sharper when it comes to betting now. So, we have the Lions -2 here, but I think both of these teams are closer than the records would indicate. Obviously, we've talked about all the time, but the Vikings are 9-0 in 1 possession games this season. Lions are just 2-5, but the Lions have also faced the second toughest schedule this season, according to our strength of schedule metric. So there's this team I like backing like week in and week out, and I try to find my spots in fading the Vikings. But Jared Goff, he is playing at a high level right now. As we mentioned, he's coming off a great game last week. He threw for 340 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Jaguars, has an 8-1 touchdown interception ratio past 5 games. Like I said, if Jamison Williams can return to at least a part-time role, this will be the first time all season he has all 4 of his wideouts fully healthy. DeAndre Swift looks 100% after dealing with injuries early in the season. So this Lions offense should be able to put up a ton of points in what should be a shootout. And on the other side, the Vikings, they managed to escape with a 27-22 win over the Jets last week. But, according to our luck rankings, it was the luckiest result of week 13. The Jets outgained the Vikings by nearly 200 yards, and they actually closed the game with 6 straight drives that reached the red zone, but they were only able to score 16 total points on those drives. So Minnesota's probably not going to get that lucky against a Lions team who have scored a touchdown on 74% of the red zone drives this season, which leads the league. So there's just a lot of reasons to like the Lions here. And it's a shame, we're not getting points on this. Maybe like 5 years ago we would have been, but the market's a lot sharper now, like I said. So I think the most likely outcome here is the Lions winning by 3 points. And that would be fitting since, the Vikings are due to lose by 1 score and the Lions are due to win by 1. So I love getting Lions at -2 here.
All right. So you mentioned the luck rankings. If people haven't seen them yet, they are just brilliant, and they are the best way and the first way Koerner and Nick Giffen and Billy Ward, the analytics team here at Action, have found a way to quantify essentially regression. And we've seen it all season long. Teams that are at the top of the luck rankings tend to cover the spread the week that they top the luck rankings. What I love this week is that Dan Campbell was asked in a press conference, why are the Lions at 5-7 favored against the Vikings who are leading the division? And he's just like, I don't know. I don't have an explanation. I don't understand it. It's all the more reason to love the Lions because Dan Campbell doesn't know what's going on. Simon Hunter, preach to us.
Well, I'll piggyback real quick off that Lions game. I don't know if the public's getting smarter. They might have just been burned by so many of these lines where they're just like, realize at this point of the season, you know what? I probably should just ride with the pros and maybe I'll catch one of these eventually. Same game here. I know that Darren talked about there's a lot of public love maybe for this Denver team, but it all depends on the book. There's certain books that have just held the 9.5 all week. Those are the books that are going to get pounded by professionals and the public. There are other books that have moved to 8.5, and the certain books that have stayed at 9.5, they're going to have more Denver money. So no surprise there. I still think though this week we love Denver, right, Chad? That's our bet this week. I have to take it. Couldn't fight it. I mean, last night when I sent in the number, I think it was 9.5 or 9. Even at 8.5, you're still getting a great number across a key number. Have no issue taking it there. And it's just about Russell Wilson. Not even the fact that he can bounce back here. He's just with the weapons around him. He can't get worse than he's been. And the Denver, their defense is what we're betting on here. That's what I'm backing. It's not so much about Russell Wilson. It's about this defense at home in a divisional game, getting more than a touchdown. That's just too many points. This is an inflated line just because the public loves Mahomes so much. We already know the deal. This is going to be the most teased team this week. It's going to be the most money line parlayed team. Everyone's all over the Chiefs here. We're getting free points here. So that's one of those. You just have to take these points and kind of hold your nose when you do it. It's not going to be a fun game. It's never fun going against Mahomes. We've seen him as a big favorite here on the road. He wins those games, but he doesn't cover. He's 1-6 in his last 7 road games as a 7 or more point favorite. That's a big deal. It just shows how the line gets inflated because the bookmakers need to protect against all these teasers and all these money line bets that people throw in on these Chiefs teams. So not every book is going to be all in and need the Chiefs, just a handful. I'm expecting most books are going to need Denver this week. So if you can still look around and find a 9.5, I would.
Well, look, there's a lot of data that backs up taking the Broncos here. And some of the stats going back 20 years just show the later you get into the year, the bigger the number in these divisional games, especially when you've got teams with huge winning percentages like the Chiefs against teams with terrible winning percentages like the Broncos. Those are covering at nearly a 60% clip. And specifically to Mahomes, you talk about his record as a big favorite. He is so good in November and December. The line gets so inflated that even though he's, I think, 35-2 in November and December, he's 17-18-2 against the spread in November, December, because the line gets so big that you almost automatically have to fade him. Love the Broncos. It's going to be so upsetting to watch that game. Chris Raybon, what do you got?
I'm going with the Carolina Panthers +3 at the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's struggled to cover the number in the last 3 games. They're 0-3 against the spread. And a big reason why is they've been averaging under 65 yards a game rushing. And now Kenneth Walker, who's averaging 4.7 yards per carry and has 9 touchdowns in his last 8 games, is not expected to play. And remember, Geno Smith has the highest passer rating and has the 3rd most yards on play action. So not only, does Seattle get hurt from not being able to run the ball as well, but the offense as a whole gets hurt because now your play action game is not as good. And Carolina, quietly has been 11th on defense and EPA per play since Wilkes took over. Last 3 games, Carolina allowing just 12.7 points and 282 yards per game. And they have J.C. Horn at corner, who should be able to limit one of Lockett or Metcalf. He's allowing just a passer rating of 38 this year. He's been great. And Metcalf is actually questionable for this game. Looks like he's going to play, but he may not be 100%. And for this Carolina offense, they're giving up the second lowest pressure rate. So I don't think Darnold's going to have a complete disaster game here. For whatever reason, Mayfield just didn't fit there. Every other quarterback in Carolina is averaging 7.3 yards per attempt, 6.6 net yards. Mayfield was just 6.4 yards per attempt, 5.3 net yards. It just didn't work out. But I like any quarterback but Mayfield for this Carolina offense. And they've been running the ball 143 yards per game since McCaffrey was traded, and Seattle's allowing the second most rushing yards per game. So I think this could be another big one for D'Onta Foreman here. And just dogs in the spot all year have been crushing. Dogs of more than a field goal with a total of 47 or less are 55 and 32 against the spread this year, 63%. So give me the Panthers plus 3.5.
Also a great play. Anybody but Baker in Carolina, I think, is a common refrain.
And only Baker in LA.
Yeah, only Baker in LA with 2 days of practice. It's really the best way for him to play. But look, I've said it. I programmed it. I freaking love the Broncos today. Love. I've just mushed the Broncos. I've mushed everybody who's bet on the Broncos. I'm sorry, but I was convinced to take the Broncos before we even started the show. I don't have to tell you. Darren Rovell, take us through some news.
I think I'm looking at the Chiefs Vikings parlay right now. Very serious. just to do that one. Most bet overs, Vikings Lions 51.5, Texans Cowboys 44, and Dolphins Chargers 53.5. Most bet unders, Chiefs Broncos, that's at 44. Under in 11 of 12 games for the Broncos. They have failed to score 17 points in 10 games. Jets Bills, some defense there, 43. Weather doesn't seem to be an issue. Again, maybe this is a global warming thing. I'm programmed on December 11th to give you the weather report, and I got nothing. I've given a weather report like twice this year on 2 games. There is something wrong here, but that's okay. And then Browns Bengals 46.5, and Convince Me is brought to you by Bet365, the world's favorite sports book. Bet $1, get $200 free in Colorado and New Jersey using the code ACTION. And yes, it's week 14, so you bet, Chad, that I have now memorized it. Back to you.
Well done, because I have not. And for the love of football, can we all get together and reverse climate change so we can get some snow in the Northeast and get some really ugly betting going on some totals? If for no other reason than that, Koerner, please discuss some totals.
So I'm going with the Panthers Seahawks under 44.5 here. Looks like 67% of the action is on the over, which, makes sense considering both of these defenses have been below average this season. But, I think there's a few reasons to like the under here. The first is just the Panthers offense, how it changed with Sam Darnold under center in his first start in week 12. They played at the second slowest pace that week. And, they ran the ball in early downs at the highest rate in the league. And these were both adjusted for situation neutral metrics. So yeah, and then they won 23-8 against the Broncos. So I see them sticking with this plan here against the Seahawks defense that has struggled defending the run this year. So look for the Panthers to lean on D'Onta Foreman heavily here to shorten the game and keep the Seahawks offense off the field. And as Raybon mentioned, one of the keys to Geno Smith's success this season has been the play action. He ranks first in QB rating on play action passes this season. And with Kenneth Walker out, they're going to be starting Tony Jones Jr. So that's not going to instill fear in the defense on play action passes as much. So it's going to allow the Panthers a chance to potentially slow down DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett here. And last, but certainly not least, Bill Vinovich will be reffing this game, and he is notoriously good for the under. The under has gone 79 and 54, so 59% of the time in his career. And there's a clear reason for that too, right? He doesn't call penalties. He's called the fewest penalties per game each of the past 3 seasons. So I think, all these signs point to this being a lower scoring game. And I like getting the under 44.5 because that covers key numbers like 41, 43, and 44 for totals. So this is my favorite total for the day.
Koerner, that's not fair because I can't quit NFL referee stats when it comes to totals. So it's like you're trying to slant the game in your favor. Simon, what's your total?
I'm on the Titans Jags under 41 this week. Just a clear matchup between two teams that have a lot of injuries. And that's what I'm looking for. It's like, okay, what do we know the Titans have banged up? A couple of receivers. Derrick Henry, even though they haven't said he's got an injury, you just watch the film. His first step just looks not the same as it did early in the season. He's not really breaking through that initial line of tacklers. He's kind of getting hit and just falling down. It's just, he's looked different these last couple of weeks. We see the Tennessee offense struggling since then. Flip the other side, this Jaguars team, I don't know what I'm getting for Trevor Lawrence. They've really kept it in-house what his injury is. We heard early in the week he probably wasn't going to play. Now they're saying he is going to play. He's going to tough it out. This is for their season. I understand that. Like this is one of those games where if they can win this and then beat Tennessee again in 2 weeks, maybe they could flip this division. I just don't see it. I see a Vrabel bounce back game, and we've seen it when Vrabel, his offense is suffering, he has the defense pick it up. So it seems like a classic 9-6, ugly 14-7 kind of battle between these two division foes. The fact that it's 41, the public has been hammering the over all week, and it just has not moved. That's kind of a telltale sign there that the books, they think it's going to be an under game as well. So I like the position there with back in the books here. 41, 40, 41 and a half. Either way, if you can find it there, that's a good number.
All right, we got 2 unders. Raybon, people have been trying to figure out what to do with this Buffalo New York Jets game all week. You have an opinion.
Yeah, I like the under in this game at 43 and a half. I think this should be more like a 41 type under here because you look at these defenses. Both of them are top 6 in DVOA. Both of them are top 10 in pressure rate, and they blitz at a bottom 10 rate. So that means they can get pressure without sending extra rushers, so they can sit back in coverage. That's always the way you hold down scoring and get off the field on third down. Both of these teams also top 10 in fewest 20-yard plays allowed, passing. And you look at this Jets team, they're 5th in pass defense DVOA. We know Sauce is playing well. The Buffalo Bills in 4 games against top 12 pass defenses this year, they're averaging over 6 fewer points per game than they average against defenses outside of the top 12. So these are the kind of defenses that slow down Buffalo. And remember, they only scored 17 points in the first matchup. Buffalo's also a bit more run heavy lately. They're averaging a 40% design rush rate over their last 4 games compared to 33% in the first 8. And on the other side, I think this is where the Mike White love kind of runs out a little bit here because remember, he faced Chicago. That's the worst defense in the league in weighted DVOA. Minnesota, 20th. Now Buffalo, top 5. He played Buffalo last year, 4 picks, no touchdowns. It wasn't good. And Buffalo's got all these great metrics on defense, despite 10 missed games from Tre'Davious White, 3 missed games from Poyer, 3 missed games from Edmonds, 3 missed games from Oliver, 3 missed games from Rousseau. So I think this Buffalo defense might be even better than the metrics suggest. So outdoor divisional unders, 62-38-1 since last season, 26-11-1, 70% this season. So give me the Bills, Jets under 43 and a half.
Yeah, this is my choice without a doubt. I have been waiting for the moment to get off the Mike White hype train. I felt like you don't get credit for dominating the Bears. You don't get credit for looking really good against a very holy, and I don't mean spiritual, Minnesota Vikings defensive secondary. This is when Mike White sort of finds truth of what it's like to be an NFL quarterback. Give me the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets under 43 and a half. Darren, we got the touchdown show coming up in a few minutes after we sign off here, and you've got a poll for who will have a anytime touchdown today. And remember, go slow so I can write it down.
Austin Eckler, -138. Tyreek Hill, -110. Mike Williams, +150. And Trent Sherfield off the 30-1 hit on the first TD last week, +162. You know, it seems like the public just likes to get what they think is the guarantee here. And Eckler's at 41%, Tyreek Hill's at 42%, 12% for Mike Williams. And people think Trent Sherfield is just completely overvalued. 5%, which is the lowest we've ever had any single option on this anytime TD poll.
All right, let's do a whip around. Koerner, Eckler, Tyreek Hill, Mike Williams, Sherfield. Any of those four or somebody else?
No, those prices are pretty good. I think I'll just go with Jeff Wilson here, even money, just because he's still their goal line back. It's a good matchup for running backs. So I always like taking Jeff Wilson at plus money when I can.
Simon, one of those four? Jeff Wilson, somebody else?
No, I'll go with the number 2 receivers. Give me Mike Williams or Waddle, one of those guys. Good value this week. Both coming back. I feel like they're going to be underrated anytime touchdown.
Raybon?
You need Mike Gesicki at long odds.
Mike Gesicki, as usual, Raybon, a wild card gross thing to say to end the show. Everybody, this has been Convince Me, presented by Bet365. Don't forget, download the free award-winning Action Network app. For Sean Koerner, for Simon Hunter, for Chris Raybon, for Samantha Previte, for Darren Rovell, for our producers. Stick around. Touchdown Show with Nick Giffen and Gilles Gallant coming up. Take it away.
Thank you, Chad, and the whole Convince Me crew, and welcome to the Touchdown Show on the Action Network, presented by Bet365. I'm Gilles Gallant with the Action Network. We're here every week, and I've got my man, Dr. Nick Giffen, joining me every week. Nick, we got to talk some touchdowns. 6 teams on bye this week, so the matchups maybe not as sexy as last week or some previous weeks when we were doing these shows, but still some value on the board. So let's highlight some matchups we like, and then, of course, we'll preview Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, in those matchups and in Sunday Night Football, we're going to give out which players we are buying or selling from those games. And, of course, we're still going to have our official 3 anytime touchdown picks each for today's slate. And if you want any additional picks, make sure you're following Gilles and myself in the Action app.
Absolutely. And make sure as well to stick around until the end of the show after we give out our picks, because we've got a special anytime touchdown boosted parlay from Bet365. No gimmicks, just some boosted odds on some guys who are pretty much minus odds this week. But let's look out as well tonight. If you're watching the show, look out tonight for the Action Network Twitter account, because we do a Sunday Night Football contest where if you pick who scores the first touchdown in Dolphins Chargers, you could win $100 with the correct answer. And the Touchdown Show is presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. If you sign up with promo code ACTION, you'll get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in both New Jersey and Colorado. All you got to do, bet $1 on any game, you get $200 free. It's a pretty sweet deal, Nick. Well, Nick, I want to talk about some of our best bets today. I've got a best bet today for the 1 o'clock slate. We both got picks in this game. We're going to start with the Vikings versus the Lions. Probably a high-scoring matchup. It's one of the higher totals of the week, over 52.5, under 52.5, right around there. And I'm going to start with TJ Hawkinson. I'm going to take his touchdown odds at plus 190. Now, the obvious narrative that you can immediately look at is a revenge game. But for me, it's about the work and the volume. 40 targets in 5 games since coming to the Vikings. He's playing over 85% of the snaps. You would think he had been there since the start of the season. Now, he's only scored 1 touchdown as a member of the Vikings. That was against the Patriots on Thanksgiving. But he's also faced some tough matchups. Like, he's had the Bills, he's had the Cowboys, the Commanders, and the Jets. They all rank top 5 in DVOA versus tight ends this season, probably combined like 3 to 4 touchdowns allowed amongst all those teams. But the Lions are not part of that group. They've allowed 8 touchdowns to tight ends this year, Nick. Even Evan Ingram scored on them last week. So I like Hawkinson a little bit better to be able to score this week. And if there's any player who's really out there to exploit the Lions defense, it's got to be TJ Hawkinson, who would probably know the ins and outs of who's the personnel on the defensive side. So my best bet of week 14 is TJ Hawkinson at plus 190.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Lions defense versus the tight end. If you're allowing Evan Ingram to score, come on. I mean, I've been on Evan Ingram a couple times this year. He hasn't scored, and then he does it last week against the Lions. So right there with you on Hawkinson. I'm going to stay in this same game, Gilles, and I'm going to take DeAndre Swift at plus 145 to score a touchdown. Now, again, this is why you want to follow us in the Action app, because I tracked it yesterday. It was plus 145. Best you can find out there now is plus 125, but it is still value. So would absolutely bet it still at plus 125. But the thing I like about DeAndre Swift, it seems like he's kind of recaptured this role that he kind of had at the beginning of the season prior to injury as the lead back in this three-headed monster, this committee here. He did play 51% of the snaps last week, which of course led the Detroit running backs. Additionally, this year, he's scored a lot of touchdowns. He has touchdowns in 6 of 9 games, including 4 of the 5 games where he's been north of 40% of the snaps. So you got to think he should be north of 40% of the snaps again this week. Pretty good chance to get into the end zone. Minnesota as well. This is a great situation for him because they allow the 5th most yards per game receiving to running backs. And Swift, of course, is the pass catching back, the main one on this team. He does have 14 targets over the last 2 games. So he's really getting the volume as of late as well. The Vikings, they play the 2nd most zone defense in the NFL. And it turns out that Swift has over 2 yards per route run versus zone defense and less than half a yard per route run versus man. So the fact that the Vikings play a whole lot of zone defense also sets up well for him. So positionally, it sets up well because they're weak against running backs, and schematically, it sets up well for DeAndre Swift here. Obviously we got Detroit at home. We got this really high total, maybe game of the week type thing with that 52.5 total. You got to think they'll have some scoring opportunity, the Lions here, with such a high total and being favored at home. So we're projecting fair value right around plus 107. So absolutely would still take this at plus 125, plus 115, because that's above what we are projecting.
Awesome. And one of the things too, a lot of people will look at the previous matchup from earlier this year. They'll see that Jamal Williams, like he ran for 2 touchdowns on them. And I think that they could both score in this matchup. I think the way that the Vikings defense is set up, that the Lions can actually exploit that. Also the fact that the Lions, their offense is night and day compared to home to road. When they're at home, they're averaging like over 30 points per game. So it's one of those types of things where everybody can eat. But Williams is already down to maybe minus 120. You might be able to find plus 110, maybe, but you're probably having to look at a 2 touchdown angle for Williams. And I just think with Swift emerging back into this offense, especially as he's shaking off some of those injuries, I'm not sure if Williams is going to get as much volume to be able to get those 2 touchdowns. So Swift and Williams, I think, will be more in a running back by committee, I guess is the way it looks. Now let's look at a marquee matchup. For me, for the 1 o'clock slate, Nick, I was looking at the Eagles versus the Giants. NFC East, I'm a little partial to the NFC East. Obviously, I'm wearing a Cowboys hat, but I am paying attention to what happens in this game. Looking at the touchdown odds right now, Jalen Hurts leads the NFL in red zone rushing attempts. He's obviously going to be the favorite to score a touchdown in this game at plus 105. Of course, his running back, Miles Sanders, right there. And Saquon Barkley, who still not sure if he is actually going to play. Think if he does play, he should be at those odds. But again, if he doesn't play, then obviously other guys are going to move up the chain as far as odds go. But for me, Nick, looking at some of these guys here of who I'm buying and who I'm selling and who I would like to buy in this game. Now, this narrative has been brought up quite a bit this week, and as it should. But Boston Scott at plus 600 is interesting. I'm not saying maybe you put a full unit on it, but Boston Scott has scored in every career game versus the Giants, 6 games. And the Eagles secondary, they've allowed the fewest receiving yards, fewest passing explosive plays. They're 6th overall in wide receiver touchdowns. So for me, I'm going to be selling Giants wide receivers, specifically Darius Slayton. Slayton, who is the default wide receiver 1 now in this offense, him and Richie James. Slayton has the 2nd highest drop rate in the NFL, and he's able to get some good passes over the top. I think that's really the only way that they're going to be able to pull off a wide receiver touchdown for the Giants in this game. So I am buying Boston Scott. I probably only would put like a half unit, maybe a quarter unit on it. And then I'm fading Giants wide receivers in this matchup.
I'm glad you chose this game for us because, I'm a Commanders fan as well. So we're both rooting against both of these teams, aren't we?
Can we get a tie? Yeah, another tie.
Exactly. Well, I Commanders did tie these Giants just last week. So as far as my buys and sells, I'm going to go with Daniel Bellinger. I'm buying him at plus 490. And I don't love this spot. Obviously, he's, kind of returning from injury. I think the line is just too long here on Bellinger. It's not an amazing matchup. Like the Eagles are in the top 10 in DVOA versus the tight end position, but they have allowed some volume to the tight end position. So I kind of think he should be around like plus 350 to plus 425 by our projections. And because the Eagles do have such good outside cornerbacks, the way you score on the air through them is usually through the slot or through the tight end position. So that's why I would buy Daniel Bellinger at anything longer than plus 425. As far as a sell, I'm going to sell AJ Brown here at plus 110. So you're selling the Giants wide receivers. I'm going to sell the Eagles top wide receiver here, AJ Brown. And that's, again, if you look at zone versus man, the Giants play the most zone defense in the NFL. And Brown only has 2 touchdowns this year versus the zone defense and 1.59 yards per route run. So, it's just kind of a situation where he's not going to match up schematically here very well. Plus, the Giants are also better versus the deep ball and versus outside per defensive DVOA. And Brown does run 75% of his routes on the outside. And he also has a higher average depth of target than his teammate Devontae Smith. So I think, again, just another situation where defensively the Giants set up well to stop AJ Brown, and maybe this is a Devontae Smith game.
It's a bold call, especially with AJ scoring 2 touchdowns last week against the Titans. He's going to be one of the most popular guys to bet this week, just because, again, he's just, he's got like 10 touchdowns already this year, and he's clearly the number 1 target on that offense. But bold move, man. Good for you. I love when people make bold moves like that, because I'm too much of a chicken shit to do it. But again, AJ Brown is who you're fading, and Daniel Bellinger is who you're buying in that matchup. All right, let's look at our second best bet of the day. Now, for me, Nick, I'm a little jaded what happened last week, because I feel like I was on the bad end of luck here, and I'm not going to overlook it, but at the same time, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take the Jets wide receiver. So I'm looking at the Jets versus the Bills today, and I'm going to put a half unit on Garrett Wilson and a half unit on Elijah Moore. And we're going back to this because, again, they had 7 red zone trips against the Vikings. I'm still kind of bitter and furious about that, and that Mike White ended up having to rush for a touchdown in that game. I mean, Garrett Wilson, I don't want to get too deep into it, but a red zone machine. Regardless of quarterback, he's 8th in the NFL, 17 red zone targets. Moore has actually been playing a lot more snaps now with Mike White. He played 65% of snaps against the Vikings. He's caught a touchdown in 4 of 6 games with Mike White at quarterback. And the Bills secondary, a little vulnerable. They've given up 12 touchdowns to wide receivers this year. Now, the reason why I bring that up is that if you look at the previous 2 seasons when the Bills were having success, they only allowed 19 touchdowns total to wide receivers over the previous 2 years. 7 touchdowns last year to wide receivers. So clearly they're struggling at that spot. And the Bills have actually been one of the worst teams versus slot receivers. 5 of those 12 touchdowns have been scored from the slot. And Robert Saleh, and you've seen from the snap counts, Elijah Moore is actually exclusively playing in the slot now. 40 of his 58 snaps last week versus the Vikings were from the slot position. So I think at least one of these wide receivers is scoring a touchdown on the Bills secondary, but I'm going to put a half unit on each. So Garrett Wilson at plus 275 and Elijah Moore at plus 600 against the Bills.
I like it. Gilles, you and I, we were talking about the slot a lot this week, the slot position. And I came up with like some slot rankings kind of on a whim just to do that because I was also eyeing a couple players in the slot, and that's where I'm going. I'm going to Jerry Jeudy at plus 240 in the Broncos versus Chiefs game. And Jeudy, he does line up in the slot a whole lot, like 70% of the time. And with Cortland Sutton out, you have to think that means Jerry Jeudy is just going to get funneled even more volume than he normally gets. And this is what I really love. So first of all, before we even get to the slot angle, again, if we talk man versus zone, Jerry Jeudy has the highest discrepancy in the NFL this year between man and zone efficiency. Oh, wow. He has 6.09 yards per route run versus man defense and 1.34 yards per route run versus zone defense this year. And Kansas City does play the 7th most man defense. So you got to think that 6.09, well, it still is going to regress some. It does show he has absolutely massive upside, big play potential, especially versus man defense. And then we talk about the slot position. Kansas City, super duper weak versus the slot. I have them as the worst team in the NFL per my made up slot power ranking because, they allow 10 touchdowns this year to the slot wide receiver position, which is the most in the NFL, tied for the most with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. They also allow the 9th most yards per route run to the slot and the 8th most yards per game to the slot receivers. So absolutely a situation where I think Jerry Jeudy can take advantage of Kansas City, whether it's schematically, whether it's just positionally. And of course, here's the kicker. Obviously, Denver is a pretty big underdog against the Kansas City Chiefs. So you got to be, you got to think Russell Wilson will be throwing the ball a whole lot in this game. If they get down early, there could be a whole lot of passing game script here, which means Jerry Jeudy should have plenty of opportunity to get in the end zone with Sutton out, and just the way this game sets up for him in the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver 1 by default with Sutton out. Remember, we were talking about this off air. I was like, oh, I really want to take Latavius Murray just because of the way the Broncos offense is and how anemic they are.
Mm-hmm.
But you got burned by that a couple of weeks ago. We talked about it, and it was just like, you know what? The value just isn't there comparatively to a guy like Jerry Jeudy because of the stats and the matchup that he's going to be facing here. So good pick by you to be able to find that. And you're seeing money already come in. I'm seeing Denver as low as +9 now as the week progresses. All right, let's look at another top matchup today with one of the lower totals of the day, to be honest. It is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the San Francisco 49ers. And before the season started, this matchup probably would have been primetime material. But now, I mean, it's going to be probably one of the slog games that we're going to see at the 4 p.m. Eastern slot. And there's a couple guys that I like to score in this matchup, a couple guys that I want no part of. And the guys that I think are pretty good value, I'm going to give you one on each side. I think it's a great price right now on Chris Godwin at +240. Now, he's not listed in the top 5 to score this week comparatively to Christian McCaffrey, who's at +110. And then you've got Debo at +175, Brandon Ayuk, and Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White, the running backs for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But for Godwin, I just think this is a great price on him because he's got double-digit targets in 7 of 10 games. He's clearly Tom Brady's favorite target, even though I think Mike Evans, and I think the world of him, Chris Godwin is the guy that who you trust on the line. As for Kittle, I mean, we just talked about this. The Bucs, they've allowed 10 touchdowns from the slot, and that's where Kittle lines up exclusively. So I think he could be in there a lot to block, maybe even leak out for some catches, especially in the red zone. But who I'm fading is actually the Bucs tight ends in both Cade Otton and Cameron Brate. And not because of the odds. I mean, their odds are fantastic. They're at +600 and +850. But I will just say this, there's a reason why those odds are what they are, because the Niners have only given up 2 touchdowns to tight ends this year, and both were in the same game versus the Falcons, and both were within like the 5-yard line. I don't see that happening in this game. Now, I'm not saying not to bet Cade Otton or Cameron Brate because it's pretty decent value. What I'm saying is that Fred Warner and those 2 high safeties in that defense just do not allow much over the middle. You saw it last week against Miami. You're probably going to see it again tonight. So Chris Godwin and Kittle is who I'm buying. Cade Otton and Cameron Brate is who I'm fading. Who do you like in this matchup, and who are you fading?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take 2 San Francisco wide receivers as my buys. I'm going to buy Deebo Samuel at +175 at Bet365, and I'm also going to buy Jawan Jennings at +850. Yes, I am returning to my guy, Jawan Jennings, who I made as my week 1 long shot play. And speaking of week 1, that was when they played the Chicago Bears. You remember that slop bowl? It was raining. It was muddy. Well, they really leaned on Deebo Samuel in that game. He was great in the slop. Now you got to think with Brock Purdy in at quarterback, San Francisco is probably going to rely on Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, maybe a little bit more. But I just like Deebo Samuel's odds because he gets the receiving and some rushing work. Again, the slop here. So I think this is just a really good situation for Deebo to gain some extra usage with the backup quarterback, the backup quarterback in, and the rain potential. But also when San Francisco does pass, both Deebo and Jawan Jennings are better versus zone defense than man defense. And this has been a common theme, especially with Deebo Samuel throughout the course of his career. He's been better versus zone defenses. So it's not just like a small sample size aberration or anything. So I really like this spot for both of them. The Bucs, they do play the 5th most zone defense. So that sets up really well for Deebo and Jawan Jennings. And again, in that slop ball, Jawan Jennings almost caught a touchdown versus the Bears. He had a nice long catch. He just didn't have the speed to get to the end zone. So hopefully he can turn on the afterburners this time. But in terms of who I am selling the Tampa Bay running backs. Just not a good matchup here. I mean, San Francisco crushes the running back position. They're number 2 in defensive DVOA versus the rush. and they're number 1 in defensive DVOA versus the past 2 running backs specifically. So I just got to fade Tampa Bay running backs based off of that reason alone.
I love it. Let's move over to Sunday Night Football now, because I don't really want to think about Bucks 49ers too much. I can't imagine we're going to see more than like a 14-10 game. And if there's no touchdowns, then we could just move on. But let's look now at Sunday Night Football with the Dolphins versus the Chargers, a little more of appealing matchup when it comes to touchdown betting. And the usual suspects are at the top of the list. You're seeing Austin Eckler at minus odds. Tyreek Hill and is also minus odds at minus 110. Then both Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert right around even odds. And then, of course, Jalen Waddle at plus 120. But the guy that I'm looking at to buy in this matchup is Gerald Everett. Right now, he's in the range of plus 280 to plus 300, depending on the book that you use. But the Dolphins have just struggled versus tight ends all season. I mean, 7 touchdowns allowed to the position, 4 in the last 4 games. Even the Texans got a touchdown from a tight end versus Miami. You had him, Jordan Akins, who scored in that matchup. And I just expect with Mike Williams back, Everett should maybe see a little more man coverage. This is the first game that the Chargers are actually going to have their full trio of wide receivers all playing together. So again, I just think Everett, people maybe not thinking about him, but he's going to have a lot of success over the middle. And the guy that I'm fading, it's not that I don't think he's a good quarterback. I just don't want to bet on Tua Tagovailoa to score a touchdown. Seeing him in the range of plus 400 to plus 600. And the reason being is since he's come back from concussion, he just doesn't run, and rightfully so. I mean, he's had 2 concussions this year, but he's had 6 rushing attempts in those games for 0 yards. And why would he run? You know what I mean? You've got Raheem Mostert, you got Jeff Wilson. You could even throw a sweep to Tyreek Hill every once in a while. Again, there's just no reason for him to run and put him in that kind of position. And the way I look at it is that if you look at the previous matchups, he had the Lions, the Bears, and the Texans, all just terrible run defenses. If he didn't run versus them, when is he going to run? Those are top tier matchups to be able to bet rushing touchdowns. So for me, I'd want at least plus 750 based on the implied odds for Tua to score based on this matchup and the way that their offense is. So I'm going to be fading him in this matchup, and I'm going to be taking Gerald Everett versus the Dolphins tonight.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of Gerald Everett, I'm not really buying anyone. I think the odds, honestly, for this game are just a little too juiced overall across the board. But I would like Everett at the right price. I think you can find him over plus 300 now. So I do think I would consider taking that. Again, Miami just great spot for Everett. You mentioned he could face a lot more man coverage with Mike Williams back. Well, Miami already plays man coverage in a top 5 rate in the NFL. We saw what Everett did last week versus another high man coverage team, the Las Vegas Raiders, where he had 80 receiving yards and was one of my best bets of the week as far as his receiving yards prop to go over there. So definitely like that. But really what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sell Keenan Allen. You can find him at plus 137. And Keenan Allen, he has been a machine versus zone defenses throughout his career and this year at 2.52 yards per route run, but unfortunately not as good versus man defense, only 0.65 yards per route run. And of course, as we just said, Miami top 5 in the NFL in terms of man coverage rate, 4th in the NFL actually in man coverage rate. They've also only allowed 2 touchdowns versus the slot position. And Keenan Allen lines up in the slot 68% of the time. So not a great spot here for Keenan Allen. So I'm fading him in this primetime matchup.
Sounds good. Let's move over now, Nick, to our favorite long shot pick of the week. So these are usually touchdown odds, like over plus 500. And we both have quarterbacks, which I find interesting because usually those are the guys that are listed over plus 500, unless you're going to take like a tight end 3 or a random wide receiver 4 or something like that. But I like to take guys who are going to be on the field pretty much for every snap. So we're going to be looking first at the Browns versus Bengals. And I'm going to be taking Joe Burrow to score a touchdown at plus 600. I've taken him before in this spot. I did mention him to score last week, and he did come through. Now, why we're taking Burrow is he's got 5 rushing touchdowns this year and 20 red zone carries. Both are 3rd amongst all NFL quarterbacks. Why I bring up the red zone carries, Nick, is the 20 red zone carries for Burrow are actually more than Josh Allen, and it's the same number that Justin Fields has. but we're getting plus 600 for him instead of, the plus 150 to plus 175 range. And I think part of the reasoning is just mobility. He isn't as fast as Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, but to me, he's the new Ryan Tannehill. He's sneaky athletic, and is one of those guys I think that likes to impose his will. Like, again, I don't really like to bet those kind of angles, but just from an eye test standpoint, you do see that. And as for the Browns, like, their run defense just isn't good enough. Like 16 rushing touchdowns allowed. That's 30th in the NFL. 5 road games this year, 2 rushing touchdowns allowed in all but one, except for the Texans game last week, where they just scored all touchdowns from their defense and special teams. And also, I don't really like to get too caught up in home road splits for quarterback touchdowns, but it is worth noting that Burrow's last 3 rushing touchdowns were in Cincinnati, and that's where the game is tonight, or today rather. So give me Joe Burrow to score a touchdown at plus 600.
I like it. The new Ryan Tannehill. We're gonna have to use that one. Keep that in the memory bank there. So my quarterback that you alluded to is going to be Kenny Pickett. You can get him at plus 500 in this Steelers versus Ravens rivalry game. I got my half unit on this one. What I think is interesting is obviously with no Lamar here, potentially that means it's going to be harder to control possession for the Ravens. So more opportunity for the Pittsburgh Steelers to possess the ball. And the Ravens, they already allow the 3rd most red zone rushing attempts to quarterbacks so far this year. So if there's potential for even more possession for Pittsburgh, then I think you definitely could even think about more red zone opportunity for Pittsburgh as well. What I also like about Kenny Pickett is he's been improving. 4 of his 5 highest passer ratings this year have come in the last 4 games. So he's on a 4-game streak here of passing the ball really well, moving the ball. And then what that does is not only are they moving the ball and getting in the red zone, but that also opens up the opportunity for him to be able to scramble and run if teams really do have to be worried about his arm more and him making better throws. And that's definitely been the case because Pickett has 6 or more rushing attempts in 4 of the last 5 games compared to 1 of his first 4 games earlier this year. So definitely the passing efficiency has increased, but that also means his rushing volume has increased. So really like this spot for Kenny Pickett. I actually project him right just over plus 400 as fair odds. So plus 500. I mean, that's pretty big difference there. Plus 500 is like, 1 out of 6, 16.7%. Plus 400 is around 20%. So you're getting a nice like 3.3% absolute edge. And in a relative term, it's even much bigger as far as an expected ROI if our projections were correct. So love Kenny Pickett this week. You know what? I think we're going to hit 2 quarterback long shots this week, Gilles.
Well, the quarterback long shots, on the other side of the field, Tyler Huntley, really popular pick this week, seeing him anywhere between plus 250 and plus 300. Not bad, but to me, the guy I think actually that has the most value in this game right now, just because of the quarterback situation, is probably Mark Andrews. Like, I'm seeing him anywhere between plus 200 and plus 250. He's caught a touchdown in 2 of the games that Tyler Huntley started last year, for example. Again, you probably want a little bit more value. I just don't see a lot of points coming from this game, but if I had to look on the Ravens side, I'd be looking at one of those 2 guys. All right, now those are all our picks. Now here comes the fun part. We've got an anytime touchdown boosted parlay from Bet365. It's time to unveil who we're taking. And we're going Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook to score a touchdown. The odds before the boost were actually plus 164. Bet365 has boosted it for us. Now it's at plus 224, which I think is incredible value here. Let's just look at the tail of the tape. Like, Henry has 10 rushing touchdowns this year. He's one of the biggest favorites on the board to score. This is actually the 3rd time he's been part of our boost, and he hit both times previously. Now the Jaguars, 10 touchdowns of running backs this year. That's bottom 8 in the NFL. But the matchup specifically, Derrick Henry has eaten this team alive. 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games versus the Jaguars. Last game, he scored 3 touchdowns in that game against them. As for Dalvin Cook, same story. They're facing a Lions team that he scored on earlier this year. And the Lions, we just talked about this, much like the Jaguars, is terrible versus the run. 12 touchdowns allowed to running backs. They're bottom 5 in the NFL. So it's basically like 2 studs that are healthy with prime matchups. So give us a Derrick Henry touchdown and a Dalvin Cook touchdown. What are you looking at for projections and how much value we're getting based on what it's set out to be?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one because the pre-boost odds were plus 164 and we were showing fair value at plus 165. So 1 cent off of fair value to the dollar there. So thankfully with the boost, we're now showing quite a bit of value. And, we have both of these players at slightly over 60% to score a touchdown. So definitely both should be favored to score a touchdown. And then, when you kind of multiply them together, and then you take the odds, we get plus 165. And I definitely like this. Dalvin Cook, especially for me, was the one that I was like, we got to get him in the boost here. And glad we did. So I think, in this really high scoring, potentially Minnesota versus Detroit game, we've got 2 picks each, one each. And then we've got Dalvin Cook in the boost here. So we're rooting for touchdowns in that game for sure.
Absolutely. So courtesy of Bet365 is where that boost is coming from. And the touchdown show is also presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. If you sign up with promo code ACTION, you'll get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in both New Jersey and Colorado. You bet $1 on any game, you get $200 free. So that's all for today. I've got 4 picks. Nick's got 3 picks. We're going to see you next Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern as part of the Action Network Power Hour. And if you missed Convince Me, you can just rewatch the show or download the Action Network app and get all of our picks in one place. You can also see all of our Week 14 touchdown bets in the Action app. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at GDog5000. Make sure to follow Nick as well at RotoDoc. I want to thank you for watching the Touchdown Show presented by Bet365. Bon chance.